Good. Well, everyone, welcome to this webinar from the Open Group, which I'm pleased to say is being brought to us today by our friends at Mega. Before I hand over to our speakers, Yannick and Rashi, I'd just like to go over a few simple housekeeping issues to keep the event moving forward smoothly. Firstly, with regards to questions, and of course, we would encourage you to take this opportunity to ask our panel questions. If you would like to ask Yannick and Rashi a question, then the best way to do that is to write your question in the text QA facility. If you do write a question in there, can I ask you to write it or address it to all participants? That way everyone gets to see the questions that are being submitted. And our intention is to try and answer as many questions as we can at the end of today's presentation. If you'd simply like to share an observation or an opinion with a fellow attendee, then the best way to do that is in the chat facility. So questions to the panel in the text QA facility and observations and comments in the chat, please. Now, today we will be running a short poll through this presentation, so please do look out for that, and I hope you'll take part. And also, today's event is being fully recorded, so if you have to leave early or if you experience any local technical difficulties, and I know sometimes audio can be a little problematical around the globe, then everyone who is registered for today's event will get an email with a link to that recording. So Yannick, if you're ready, can I ask you to start today's presentation?
Yes, thank you very much, Simon, and thank you also to the Open Group. It's always a pleasure to be here with you and to present such interesting topics as today, I would say. So thank you very much. So today's topic that we will discuss is about composability. We're going to talk about composable business, composable enterprise, and understand how it drives speed, flexibility, resilience. So we're going to define a little bit what it is, understand the impact that can have on a business, and of course, what we want to do today is understand how the enterprise architects will also help to drive the composability. Very important for us to match these two topics as we think today, and we're going to show you why we think that enterprise architecture is actually critical for these kinds of topics. So before diving into the topic right now, just quick introductions of your speakers today. So it's not the first time we do the webinar in the Open Group, so maybe you know us already, but my name is Yannick Rudloff. I'm working at Mega International. I'm today with Rashi Bhatnagar, working also at Mega International. So we are very, very pleased and very glad to be here today with you. Quick word on Mega, right? For some of you who may not know us. So Mega is a well-established software vendor and fast-growing software vendor in the EA space. So we have approximately 2,000 customers worldwide in more than 52 countries. We have a lot of experience. We've been around for more than 30 years. But what is interesting for us is this bottom part of the slide is we've been recognized leader for enterprise architecture software vendors for quite a bit of time now, especially in Gartner for 12 years. But the one that we're very proud of, I would say, and that's very interesting for us, is that we've been voted for the second time in a row, I would say, customer choice for enterprise architecture tools, which shows that we are an enterprise-grade EA provider, but at the same time, we really simplify adoption and customer like using the software. So very proud to share that. It was just to a little bit put some I would say words around who we are as a company at Mega. So diving into the topics that is of interest today. So today we're going to talk about business composability, again, enterprise composability. We're going to talk about how we architects help on this topic. So we chose, first of all, this topic today because composability is really, really interesting, especially with the big disruptions, I would say, that happened over the last year, and so many things have changed. And this topic is really today here to understand how EA will be able to help cope with all of that. So within the next 30 to 40 minutes, I would say, We're going to, first of all, I would say, define the concept. Maybe not everybody is familiar with the concept of business composability and composability as a whole. So we're going to define that. As the topic becomes more and more popular, we want to explore how EAs can help manage the transformation to composability. And we're going to talk about a methodology that we put in place at Mega to guide enterprise architects through these steps and really understand how EA can have a big impact on that. I always start my webinar with this quote. So maybe if you already saw a webinar with me, you already saw it, but I think it's always interesting to think about the problem, especially when we talk about agility, composability, these topics like that. Think about what is the problem we want to solve with composability, with agility, and think about which area of the business we need to impact with this kind of thinking. And then, of course, we will be able to spend time of execution. But taking the time to really understand the problem that is in front of you and what you try to solve is key to that. And Rashi will walk us through that in a couple of minutes in the presentation. So diving into that, what is the problem we are trying to solve today? So we know that organizations are investing into speed, flexibility, and resilience. We are now in the wake of COVID-19. And even though things are still somehow unstable, we are now in the new reality with the experience of what happened in 2020. So we all understood that this is the new normal, and the adaptability that we have to have, the resilience that the companies are looking for, is not only about having a differentiator here. It can really make the difference between being able to be a company that stays in business and being a company that doesn't stay in business. So in previous webinars, we talked about how business can react to crisis. But on this one, we don't want to be reactive. We want to be prepared. We want to build a company that is going to be prepared for change, that is going to be not reactive to the market, but really being proactive to market changes. And it can be anything. It can be a major crisis, but also a shift of market size, of market behavior. Anything we can have here. So we know that we have to adapt to customer needs. Behavioral changes, multi-experience. We have customers who want to have voice, AI applications, and so on. So we have to adapt quickly to that. But also other things that we see here is that we want always to increase the team autonomy. We're going to see how composability can increase autonomy, actually. This is an important point. And we want to increase efficiency into building new solutions. We want to become more resilient. We talked about that, being able to react more quickly to crises, gaining clear competitive advantage. This is also clear. The point here is we see, I would say, architects coming to us and say, my CEO wants me to add a new functionality to my company, to my solution, add voice to this application. How do we do that? How do we manage these changes? How do we make sure that we can achieve quickly to make those changes to be able to I would say, thrive and stay in business in there? Composability, we'll see, it's really a way of thinking of the enterprise. It's about coping to change, and you will see that in a minute. So it's really on these challenges that today we see our customers talking more and more about composable architecture. So before defining composable architecture, a quick poll. And so Simon, if you can take the lead on that one, we're interested to understand one thing before diving into the webinar. So we had a crisis in 2020, so enterprise architecture should be driving some pieces of that. It's always interesting for us to understand in the resiliency architecture, in the way that it has been managed, how was EA helping your organization to respond to COVID-19? So you see some of the answers here, not at all, somewhat you were involved, considerably, or that EA was pervasive, meaning that you really were involved and strategically helping the company to manage that. So if you can just give us the answer on that, I think you have that on the right side of your screen. We're just going to wait for 5 seconds more before displaying that. I'm very interested to see the results. All right, Simon, I think you
yes.
can.
we're just getting the answers in. We've got 10 seconds to go.
Perfect.
4, 3, 2, 1. That's it.
All right. So we can actually see that we had most of the answer were on the 16%. So somewhat the enterprise architects were involved into the COVID-19 crisis. 11 considerable and 5% pervasive, which is very, very interesting. So most of the answer that we have are more on the BCD, which is great. Today, I really want to tell the story of how we're going to be able to have enterprise architecture be involved more in the critical path on being prepared for, I would say, more coming crises and so on. Not hoping for that, but if ever this is something that will happen. Thank you, Simon, for the poll. I'm going to share the content again to define what we have in composable business. Perfect. So let's deep dive a little bit more into business composability. Right. So here we share the two quotes that are defined by Gartner, who is really I would say saying a lot on that topic right now. But the thing is that, first of all, what is interesting to understand is that composability is a way of thinking into which we think that everything is decomposable. And moreover, as it is decomposable, it is recomposable in another stage. So the thing here that we're going to see is that we're going to be able to decompose business IT into decomposable pieces, into building blocks, as we call them, and being able to recompose that as needed. This is really important. So applied to the business, this means that business can be broken down into smaller pieces. Rashi is going to talk about that. We're going to talk about capability mapping at that moment. And we will understand how these pieces are supported by the business. We're going to see that in a minute. And these pieces, EAs are very familiar with them. You're going to see that also in a second. But this is something that building blocks, being able to talk about capability, being able to break down technologies, applications into smaller pieces, this is something into which we are very familiar with. So we really want to understand today how we can, as EA, achieve this decomposability and how we can actually make sure that we will help the business achieve that. So for the next piece of the presentation, I'm going to leave the stage to Rashi, who will bring you up to speed on how this composability is achieved in the way of thinking and how we do that with the business side.
Thank you for that introduction, Yannick. And before we get a little bit deeper into the actual methodology and framework, I wanted to just take a quick analogy. So say you buy a Star Wars Lego set, and you're expecting to make, Darth Vader's helmet because that's what you find in the store. Now, halfway through the experience of finding the right pieces and following all of the instructions, you realize what you really want is to actually make a plane. So you end up doing just that. You're going to take these pieces and you're now going to start constructing your little plane. And composable architecture is a lot like that. You have a common set of components. In the Lego world, those are blocks or building blocks. In the enterprise world, those are your assets. And we're going to talk a lot about that in the upcoming slides. But really, what I want to drive, the point that I want to drive home here is by using a finite set of enterprise parts, which include people, technologies, capabilities, applications, etc., we can construct an arbitrary number of different artifacts. And when we shift our approach towards composability, we begin to embed adaptability in the design of our enterprise itself. And that enables our enterprise to be able to plan for many futures. For example, making a plane instead of Darth Vader's helmet. So now let's go ahead and take a look at 4 steps for architecting for business composability. In our first step, we really want to understand the ecosystem. And here we're focusing on creating a baseline of our inventory. So really understanding what do we currently have. In the next step, we want to begin assessing the need for composability. So here we're really focusing about our intentionality. What is it that we want to focus on? What part of our business do we anticipate change in? Where do we want to increase efficiency, etc.? In the third step, we're going to talk about architecting. Here we're talking about understanding the underlying architecture and how do things actually begin to come together. And in the fourth step, we're really going to be talking more about building and repeating. And what does it actually mean to put this kind of plan in place or this kind of composable architecture in place so that you can truly plan for the future? So let's go ahead and just start diving right into that first step, understand. So here we want to discuss what does it actually mean to create a baseline. During this part of architecting for composability, we turn towards our enterprise architects and the inventory of capabilities, technologies, and processes that they have been building up over time. And what we want to do is start by understanding what do we currently do, what are the current needs of our customers, how are we addressing them? And to do this, we normally create few different artifacts that we can leverage to make better sense of our inventory. And those artifacts are what I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But before I do that, I did want to say that composable architecture is an enhancement to your current business architecture. It's not a replacement. We are not interested in selecting the parts of your business and completely ripping out the way things are done today. Instead, we really want to identify the parts of your business that will benefit the most from composability. For example, parts of your business that will really benefit from becoming more resilient. So we're not interested in boiling the ocean, but being a little bit more strategic. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and dive into our first artifact, in this case, business capability maps. All business capability maps break down your capabilities into smaller, more manageable elements to identify those varying rates of changes and needs for agility. So when you're in the process of creating these capability maps, you realize that not all capabilities may be equal. Some are going to be more essential for your business to work. Now, after you identify, you're going to assess that to be able to better understand what is essential for your business, and so that you can begin to prioritize where you want to start thinking about composability. Then we will think about comparing those assessments to really discern how critical capabilities are to things like efficiency, cost, and technological stability. And the last thing is, by understanding the linkages between technologies, processes, and people that support your capabilities, we're going to also gain a much fuller perspective on the level of effort that's going to be required to shift this core of our enterprise into composable architecture, because that's really what it's all about. We want to prioritize efforts on critical capabilities, and again, not try to shift everything in our enterprise at the same time. So that's from a capabilities perspective. Now let's take a look at another key artifact, in this case, customer journeys. So customer journeys are incredibly useful in helping us identify a very important perspective when it comes to the experience and interaction with your company. By creating and assessing customer journey maps, we can understand how to provide better and more personalized service to our customers. And by understanding the relationship between the customer journey and resources, for example, technologies, people, processes, and applications, we are able to understand a fuller scope of impact. So you're seeing a common trend now. We are always looking at our artifacts with relation to the other parts of our enterprise. The last thing I wanted to mention here is this information that you're gathering at this stage with customer journey, it really helps you understand where you are today and to prioritize your move towards composability. But this time, unlike capability maps, which is from an internal perspective, you're actually trying to take an external perspective for prioritization. Now, what I've just talked about at this moment are two examples of inventories. I wanted to quickly mention a few others that you might think about as you're going through this process. So other inventories can include things like applications, processes, technology landscapes, strategies. etc. It's really essentially these inventories are all the things that are necessary for your enterprise to create a baseline so that you can begin to understand how to prioritize. So that establishes our first section on creating baselines and understanding what's actually happening within your enterprise. Now we're ready to move to the second stage, which is assessing. Here, we're going to focus on identifying the scope, and more specifically, we are interested in understanding what is our need for composability and thinking about questions like, where do we need a faster time to market? So in this stage, we will take the inventories we just cultivated, your capability map, your customer journeys, perhaps your processes, and really begin to add that layer of assessment on top of them to understand where to prioritize our work to increase that efficiency and time to market. So for our first use case in this section, let's dive deeper into that capability map we started with and start to understand how can we take this capability map, but now begin to prioritize the work that's going to be done. So in this particular capability map, you'll notice that underneath every capability, you have your assets that have been associated. So for example, applications, people, processes, departments. These are all of the different assets that are required to make this particular capability work. So naturally, the question then comes down to, are the identified assets right or enough to support what we need from this capability? Are we able to anticipate and adapt to change? Are we avoiding redundant work? Where do we need to increase efficiency? These are the kinds of questions we are now going to be asking ourselves from a capability perspective to really begin to understand what work needs to be done. And you'll also notice that assessments have been performed on the assets themselves. And this helps us understand things like value, efficiency, cost, and the impact that our asset, for example, an application, has on the capability. When we take both of these two assessments together, so the assessment on the capability and the assessment on the assets themselves, and we combine them and we understand the relationship between these certain core capabilities and their assets, we can then begin to really get a good understanding of which capability might be a prime candidate for composability. So again, we're not trying to change all our capabilities at one time, but really discern which is the most critical capability for our enterprise and work on that first. For our next use case, we're going to dive into the world of processes. So once you have an inventory of your organizational or business processes, it's time to assess those processes for things like efficiency, performance, business value, risk, and execution. What's going to be the result is a heat map either on your process itself or in some sort of a table. And then these assessments will enable you to better understand how your processes support the business. And you can then begin to identify if there are any gaps and at what level of your enterprise is the need for composability the greatest. So let's take a quick example. Say that you have a process that ranks very high in efficiency and in performance. Then what that may indicate is that this process is already well taken care of. Perhaps this process is already resilient in nature to when changes arrive and fluctuations happen in the enterprise. Now, conversely, you might have a process that you've assessed that ranks really low on the spectrum of efficiency and performance. So in our heat map, it would show up in the red quadrant. And it may be causing bottlenecks and issues when it comes to being able to adapt quickly. So that could actually be a perfect candidate for you to start considering in terms of composability. But really, in the end, what happens is when we leverage these kinds of assessments to ask better questions on what is happening within our enterprise, we're able to peel back the layers and get to the core of our business and the prime use case for composability, which then Yannick is now going to build off of a little bit more. For how do we take what we've prioritized and really get down into transforming?
Thank you very much, Rashi. So with the two first steps, what we did right now is understand our need. Understand where we are, understand the need for composability, where composability would make more sense. Now let's get a bit more technical and dive into the actual architecture that we're going to use and the way we are going to do it in a technical manner. As I would say, solution architect, IT architect will be able to do it. So architecting in useful and reusable building blocks that we're going to have in the company. So let's think about now a little bit more of the actual technology piece. So re-architecting the IT landscape, we are going to think about all the applications that we have. And the goal is to create a situation in which the IT architects are going to be able to define a set of pieces that are independent, first of all, and deliver a clear business value. This is where we tie in what Rashi was just mentioning, is that when you break down your capabilities, you can actually find the way of building, connecting your IT pieces to the value that they're going to deliver and have a clear business value on this. So the pieces that we are talking about in the situation in the business composability kind of framework is called a packaged business capability. So the name can be very interesting in that situation because packaged business capabilities are actually encapsulated software components, and they represent a well-defined business capability recognizable as such by a business user. So this is very important, this piece, recognizable as such by a business user. So that means that at some point you are going to define a set, an IT component that the business is going to understand and being able to manage that and compose application out of that. We're going to talk about that in a minute. When we actually define these pieces, there is a common question that comes every time. And it's a very, very good question, very important one. What is inside of my package business capability and what is outside of it? Being able to define the borders of those package business capability is not an easy topic. There is no magic recipe, but we have some guidelines on that. The first guideline I will tell you on that one is it has to be a business decomposition. It starts with the business capability map. And this is where enterprise architects will have a huge, huge say into that. And the piece that we have is that when we think about that, we have to think about architecture principles, modularity, autonomy, orchestration, and discovery. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But here you can see that these principles are principles that we know of. Enterprise architects are very familiar with those different topics. So here we are really in the realm of what we know as enterprise architects, and we are, I would say, in the scope of designing pieces that we are going to think about to help the business. As you can see here on the left side, I've took an example of something that we can build as, I would say, a package business capability. You have clear defined border with clear defined services within that PBC, package business capability, clear defined data that are hosted within that PBC, and also, very important, clearly defined events or requests, I would say, points, entry points in the PBC, and well-defined outgoing points of the PBC, which is also called API. Very, very important to be able to understand that APIs will play a major role into that decomposing of the IT landscape. The PBC is your unit of building block. The API is the way you're going to glue them together. So in the Lego analogy before that we can break down the different pieces clearly right well, like this, excellent. Now, how do we put them together to build our new reality? This is the key is API. Again, we're going to talk about that in a minute. So also what is important here is the PBC are traditionally managed in a marketplace. So marketplace to share the different APIs that will be able to manage on your PBC. here we have an older PBC, for instance, that we have designed like that. And we have a couple of APIs here, a customer order, an order service, and so on and so forth. And these APIs, they have to be managed in a marketplace. And when that is managed correctly, you will be able to start reusing that from the marketplace and using them in different applications. We're going to go to that in a minute to understand how we will recompose the business. But when we talk about that marketplace, for us architects, this is usually called a well-defined service or API catalog that architects can reuse to actually compose the IT landscape. So then we can go into other considerations such as monetizing APIs. We can talk about composition platform. We will not go into that today. It's not the topic of what we want to achieve today. It's a little more in details. We can talk about that in other sessions if you want. But the really good point here is to talk about the functional landscape and how we will be able to design this architecture. Last piece I have on this slide is that APIs is also, you'll also be able to rationalize. At some point, we talk about application rationalization, we talk about technology rationalization. But when you think about that from a package business capability perspective, an API perspective, you can actually start to understand which APIs are the most used, which APIs are not used at all. So maybe there are some pieces of my IT landscape that today I don't need. So I can actually start to rationalize my IT given the real usage of this API from the business perspective. So the connection here is very, very important. So deep diving into a little bit more, modularity and autonomy. Modularity is the key for composability. I think that's fairly obvious. But in order to be modular like that, we will need we have a need for decompositions here. So, but here the key points is that the modularity has to be derived from the business models. It is actually the business who will dictate the modularity. They will express their need for the modularity based on the way they see the business, right? They have to be able to recompose the different things. So when we think about achieving the composability here, we think about reassembling. I've talked about you before about how to build a package business capability with different services, data, APIs. So when you have encapsulated your IT components into those package business capability, you can actually think about how to recompose your system. So here we have what we call a system, right? A system of IT. And this system of IT comprises many package business capability that are going to be connected through the different APIs like that, in which we encapsulate the data, the applications, the services, and so on and so forth. And on that, you will be able to understand which kind of data are exchanged, which kind of I would say, protocols you're going to use to exchange data. That's, again, something we're going to see later. But the big point here is to understand that things are encapsulated and that you will be able to create your pieces like that. So technically, here, this is, of course, a static image. And technically, the point is to say, if I want to build a new food on a fly system right there, what do I need? I need an older PBC, I need a customer, I need to talk about airport, about plane, about many things like that. So you go to a marketplace and you start to drag and drop your PBCs into that model, and then connect them, glue them together with the API. That's the key point of that. So here you can see a couple of examples that we have on the PBCs. And the last piece that I wanted to say is that the goal, of course, is to build autonomous PBCs. We're going to talk about autonomy here. But autonomy means that the deliverable that you're going to have from these APIs, it has to be managed within the team that is managing the PBC. They have to be able to influence the outcome of that PBC through the different APIs, and they have to be able to be autonomous on the decision that they're going to take, so that every piece is autonomous, interoperable, and you will have less impact into modifying those systems. Talking about orchestration. So each piece that we identify here, as we said, has a clearly identified capability that is expressed through services that we will have. But the piece is that in here, you recognize the PBC that I had before my first slide. We see the APIs on the right side, on the border of that, and this has to be patternized. So the role of the enterprise architect is to define the standard behavior that the PBC is going to have when you call that, and it's going to be based on pattern. On that one, I used a service design kind of way to manage that. It's something that I use very often to say that in this particular API, if I want to reuse that in other application, in other situation, in other context, how do I call that? How do I make sure that this API will be reusable? So you decide, you design that. You design the whole piece like this. This is a BPMN diagram, by the way, that I use there, but other notations are also fine. To be able to understand what I need to exchange, how do I get the answer, and to define the pattern of exchange between that. This is going to be called, for me, the pattern of API, and it's based on pivot data formats. So all of these data envelopes that you can see there have to be managed into pivot formats that can be read by many applications. We have to build our companies on these patterns, on this standardized way of integrations. And each PC is also managed by an orchestration process that you can see here. Then again, I use BPMN for that, to understand how these different pieces, these different services, different data readings are going to be managed within the PBC, so that you can actually make sure that when somebody wants to make a change, it is autonomous enough that this process is going to be called whenever you call an API, and that this process will be able to influence, deliver the right value to the end of the customer like that. So this is, for us, really key when we talk about that, being able to orchestrate I would say, PBC, and being able to understand the pattern on these different pieces. Finally, we compose applications, right? So, oh, sorry about that. So we compose applications, we compose systems in those situations. So here, for instance, you see my food on a flight system that I built before with 3 PBCs, and I see that here it's a bit difficult to read, but you get the idea. I've composed something, and that piece, that composed solution that I made, is going to be read, consumed by multiple customers, by providers. So you can have a relationship with the external piece at the end. So when we actually take now again a step back, we actually composed a system based on building blocks that are encapsulated within business capability, package business capabilities. And those package business capabilities are encapsulated in my solution that are being used by my customer. So at any point, once I have that system like that, so now let's imagine I need now to add a new component. I want to add an AI component to my system. And this is really where I will be able to go to my marketplace, drag and drop a new AI component that already exists somewhere in my solution, glue it together with my APIs, and start to build my new solution based on that. It's not going to solve every problem right now, but it is going to be a baseline for you to build a solution based on a set of composable, reusable components that you're going to have. I also wanted to say that composable business, of course, we talk about the item, the building block that is the package business capability. But the reality is that you are not going to change your whole business into package business capability tomorrow, for sure not. You still are going to have monolithic applications, cloud services that are hosted somewhere else, microservices that you've already built. The game here is to be able to have APIs based on those multiple IT components, IT building blocks, and to be able to compose your application based on that. Whenever you have an API like that, you will be able to do that. So very, very important to understand. So on the next piece, so here we were on the architecting the PC. So we were on the way that we want to be able to understand the underlying architecture, decompose business into package business capabilities, know your APIs. Now I would like to talk about the plan, right? The planning side, the planning side of the thing, how we will build all of that, and which role everybody is going to have on this. So we've built a transformation framework at Mega that we use with our customers, where we say that enterprise architects will be able to establish the baseline, as Rashi mentioned before. Talk about business capabilities linked to value streams, very important, the concept of value streams there, being able to understand that the business capability are connected to your strategy, right? So strategy plays a big role into your business composability, and you will break down all of these pieces right there. This is the way to set up the ground for your composability, the way you're going to identify where you need to evolve. Then the solution architect are going to be able to leverage these pieces and the existing application architecture to start to build their increments, their program increments, right? That they're going to be able to talk about, I would say, intentional architecture. I'm not going to define that today, but we're going to build the solutions like that, in which we're going to say that, sorry about that, we're going to say that we are going to manage one piece of the business that's going to be going into composable architecture, one piece of the business that's going to be going there into increments number 2, number 3, and so on and so forth. So this is the way we're going to set up the roadway to understand which pieces are going to be managed. And then, of course, you have the real development work that needs to happen, the breaking down technically of the code of the applications. And this is where reconciliation will happen between the local development teams that are going to work based on the intentional architecture laid out by the enterprise architect, and reconciliation, of course, needs to happen at every point. So here, the point that we want to have on this slide is that being able to go to a more agile kind of thinking, composability in that situation will actually require many teams to work together, starting with enterprise architects, making sure that you have the right scope for your composable work, the solution architect driving the architecture of how we're gonna lay out the design of the APIs, cutting down the different PBCs, and so on and so forth, and finally the local dev team who is going to take that into account to create their emergent design based on this. So what I want to tell here to kind of summarize what we said today is different steps on this journey. So we saw how to understand, assess, architect, build, and repeat. I'm not going to go into that again, but it's really, really important to understand that we have this method that is kind of embedded in us, in the architecture community, to be able to help on composability. Some tips and tricks, right, to conduct composable architecture. So first of all, of course, do not do it all at once. So as we repeated many times right now, very important to scope the need based on strategical needs, based on market, based on your value streams, based on your products that you want to sell. That is some of the key points that we have. So thinking about combination and business grouping is going to be the second key that we have there. So the grouping of the services that we're going to have are going to be managed by the business. It's the business who is going to define the way they want to recompose that based on the business capabilities. And the encapsulated components will be glued with integration patterns that we can talk about APIs, we can talk about many things, but they have to be reusable patterns that we're going to have there. And finally, I cannot stress that enough. I said that many times already. We need to be business oriented. It has to be always aligned with the strategy and the vision of the company. Where do we want to make the most efforts to become more agile, time to market, being more resilient? And this is where we have to focus our efforts on when we talk about that. So if if I had to give a couple of key takeaways for today, is really the 4-step methodology, business composable architecture, or composable business, again, is not a replacement to your current business architecture. It is an enhancement of it that is going to realign and reshape the IT to business kind of thinking. We want to assess where the companies are going to need this efficiency, this time to market. Architects will need useful and reusable building blocks, PBCs, to build this future. And of course, enterprise architecture will play a key role in the composable business project. I like to say that every enterprise architect has already a composable mindset, to be very honest. And I think the principles that we laid out in the technical composable pieces is something that we work with our customers already today a lot. Decomposing application, talking about APIs, talking about integration, talking about how this fits all together and how we can recompose that based on building blocks. This is something that we see a lot today. So just to end the presentation before we start questions, so do not hesitate if you have questions. I see already some questions in the chat right now. If you want to know a little bit more on that, do not hesitate to contact us, right? We have our both email address on that. Today we kind of went over many things on a 30-minute base. But if you want to discuss more about microservices, about how technically we go into that, on how cloud services can be managed like that too, I'm more than happy to talk about that. And if you would like so the tool I use today to do the diagrams that I presented is called Hopex. It's the tool that we sell to our customers. If you'd like to try it out, do not hesitate. We have a 30-day trial. You're more than welcome to start a free trial, and we'll be able to help you on this. All right, perfect. So for the last 5 to 10 minutes, what we want to do is to take a couple of questions. So we hope that you find the topic interesting, and that you actually have reactions to what we said. So let me take the first question right there. So when speaking about modularity of orchestration and composability of software solution, those modules are not entirely independent and equal to each other. Yes, in real life, solutions have dependency upstreams, downstream specifically. This makes it hard to recompose a solution, etc. Yeah, sure. So do you mean that every time we recompose, we need to build different kind of orchestrator? That would make sense just asking for charity. So you don't need to build a new orchestrator for every time you will recompose. I mean, the point as the enterprise architect, thinking not only about technical pieces, but a functional point of view, enterprise architect needs to think about the pattern that we're going to use. So let's think about that. If you have an API and you want to say, I would like this piece, this building block of my IT to connect to in different contexts, you have to make sure that this piece, the way it's talking to other pieces in your IT, it's going to be done in a standardized manner based on pivot format, pivot data format. That means that every time you ask the question the same way to the application with the same format, let's say it's a JSON file, it's the same format. And on the other end, the component is answering with the same format too. And then actually in the backend, it's only about processing. It's only about the way the IT component is going to process the whole piece. So the goal here is to create a standardized way of talking between the different pieces, and then being able to reuse them into multiple contexts. So second question that we have, how can we translate higher business functions to APIs in terms of multiple transaction pattern in establishing end-to-end zones? So all the way top to backend infrastructure enterprise-wide. Yeah, today, yeah, you're right. I talked about IT solutions, but the pattern that we have described right there on the IT side in our framework, in our solution, we have actually managed this framework, this pattern at every level. At the business level, on the solution level, on the IT level, and on the infrastructure level. And it's all connected all the way from the top to the bottom. So the piece is that, of course, the same principle of modularity, of exchange of autonomy has to be applied to the business pieces. So we have to break down the business functions, understand how the business functions are talking to each other with our customers, the way we think about that, and then apply the same principle when we break down the IT. That's a little bit of a long discussion, I must say, but I'm more than happy to continue the discussion on a one-to-one basis. If you contact us, it's more than happy to do that. But the short answer is that, yes, the pattern that I presented is actually available for all the levels from the business side to the infrastructure side. Next question. So AI as part of composable architecture. Will we need to have architecture that will decompose and recompose in real time based on AI models? It is a difficult question, I must say. I have taken a kind of a task on that one, if I may. It's a difficult one. I may have to contact you directly on that one. I don't see AI being right now used to decompose. I see that it is a business decomposition. I see that it makes sense to have human thinking behind that decomposition. So for me, I really think that this has to be there has to be some brain power behind that to be able to manage this decomposition into multiple pieces. That for me is one of the key too, and this is where I see enterprise architect making the most of their knowledge into these pieces. Okay, so this was the question that we had today. Another question. So, does Mega address establishing such algorithm within the EA tool to orchestrate transaction patterns all the way from top to bottom? Yes. So with Mega, we help with the design of these pieces. So we help with the design top to bottom, strategy, capabilities, value stream, processes, business functions, solution architecture, IT architecture, and infrastructure. To manage that, we have a method that we actually call the method that is it's a box-in-box method, right? So everything is encapsulated within our building blocks, and we've established that for a while now, and this fits perfectly the kind of composable thinking. More than happy to present it to you more in detail. But yeah, we manage the design of it, and then we connect with other tools for the execution, for the more technical pieces. But that's something that we provide. All right. I don't see any other question in the question box.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat, Yannick.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
Perhaps I can read it to you the easiest. First one is from Prasanna, asking, could you please repeat the point where you talked about microservices in the context of PBCs, and asking perhaps with an example?
So on that one, I will take an example. Exactly. So we used to work, I would say 20 years ago or 10 years ago, depending on the companies, but with monolithic applications. And then we had a big shift into going into microservice approach, in which we were decomposing the application into microservices in that way. So we see some trends of customers coming to us and say, microservice of, you are in an application that is a billing application. So you have the microservice of creating the bill, modifying the bill, deleting the bill, for instance. So the point is that this is very granular and sometimes a bit difficult to manage because you have a lot of things, and sometimes it is not very business oriented, because microservices can also be sometimes a little bit more too technical to understand from a business point of view. So the goal is to take these pieces again, microservices, for instance, let's take them like that, and actually encapsulate them into a bigger piece that is called a package business capability in that case, as we talked about, and gather them all together and have the interfaces, the APIs on that package business capability to call microservices that are within that. So not to go into too much technical details, but a package business capability can be composed, can encapsulate multiple services, and microservices are part of that. So for instance, instead of having multiple sub microservices, very detailed, create, modify, delete, you're going to have one package business capability, identify as such as billing as a business capability, and that will be something that you will be able to reuse. Billing can be reused into multiple applications, for instance, or multiple solutions in your IT. So then you can start to recompose that based on reusable points that we have there.
That's great, Yannick. Thank you. And we just got one final one in the chat from Naren asking, can you talk about scoping and de-scoping criteria used for future-ready composable units?
So here we really talk about, I would say, it's about the need for the market. So for me, it's about, you have a set of products that can be delivered from a value stream. You need business capability to deliver products and so on. So the goal is really to start to understand, is your customer base right now happy with your time to value? Is your customer base needing other things, right? If you start to interview your customers and start to understand, do they need more voice capability? Do they need on-demand reporting? We have on-demand everything right now in applications. So what do they really need there? And what is the time in which they want to have that? If the answer to all of that is that you have a time to market that is very, very, very fast, I think that this area of the business is a good candidate to be able to be able to go to PBC, to business composability. Then again, I don't have a list of right now all the criteria, but time to market is one for sure. We can talk about others, but for sure that one I'm fairly, I would say, this one is really important, I would say, for this aspect.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Yannick. We're nearly at the end of our time, so this is probably a good time to draw today's event to a close. And before I do close, Yannick, are there any final points you'd just like to make to our attendees before we shut down today's event?
No, as usually, I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here. We share topics. We appreciate the feedback. We appreciate questions and discussions. So thank you very much. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're more than happy to continue the discussion here.
That's great. Well, thank you, Yannick, and thank you, Rashid, for your time. I'll reiterate thank you, everyone, for joining us, and I hope you'll join us again for a future webinar from the Open Group. So thank you, everyone, and goodbye.